Hello and welcome to the Magic Mirror Podcast. I'm your host, as usual, Khan the Trinket Mage, and with me is my co-host, 33L.
Hello.
Additionally, my other co-host, Salubrious Snail.
Hello, hello.
Today we got a fun podcast topic. We're talking about decks that we took apart for one reason or another. We're going to talk about those old lists, why we scrapped them, and maybe why we would consider putting them back together again, who knows? And then after that, we're going to get to your questions in the Beseech the Mirror section. But before we get into all that, we needed to thank the sponsor, Card Castle. They're the easy way to digitally sort your collection. You can start scanning and sorting your cards today by making a free account. And if you use our link in the description below, you get 1 free month of premium access. Thanks to Card Castle for sponsoring the podcast. So, who wants to start?
I suppose I will. So a lot of people already know a few of my decks. I've made a few videos before about decks I've disassembled. In fact, I think this entire podcast premise is because you left a comment on one of those videos where I talked about decks I've disassembled in the past. And you're like, this would be a great podcast episode. It's like, yeah.
Yes, I did.
So I'm going to bring one that's different. A lot of people might expect me to bring my Kelsey and the Plague deck or some others, but I'm going to start with a deck that actually had a similar problem to Kelsey, and that was Grismold the Dreadsower. For the uninitiated, this is 1 black and a green for a Troll Shaman with Trample. At the beginning of your end step, each player creates a 1/1 green plant creature token, and whenever a creature token dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Grismold the Dreadsower. He's a 3/3 to start out with. So you give everyone plants, including yourself, and whenever tokens die, Grismold grows. This deck is all anti-anthems, basically. So Karavek the Spiteful, Knight of Souls Betrayal, Ascendant Evankar, all these cards basically just say all creatures get -1/-1. So you auto-kill the plants. There's Illness in the Ranks and Virulent Plague, which each respectively give -1/-1 and -2/-2 to all tokens. And then there's Engineered Plague and Plague Engineer, which you name Plant on, gives -1/-1 to all the plants. So basically you just get 4 +1/+1 counters on Grismold at the end of each turn. On top of all these like board hate effects, there was just like, it was just like murder everyone with Grismold. I also, in this deck, it's a really funny piece of tech that I don't see in a lot of Grismold decks, or at least I didn't when I built it. Titania Song, it turns all treasure tokens and clues and 0-mana artifact tokens into 0/0 creatures that instantly die and also pump Grismold, so no one could use treasures or anything, which was unironically just the most fun part about this deck. I ended up taking it apart because it was super board hatey, so no one got to play Magic. It definitely blew out token players to the point where like I couldn't play it in good mind if I was up against someone who had a even remote token theme to their deck, because they would just not win. They would just instantly die. This being said, another reason I took it apart was because Farrakha was in the deck in the 99, because Farrakha can give opponents tokens when you grave hate them with Farrakha. Very funny. And I just found Farrakha to be the more fun card, which is why I ended up just building her as the commander instead, which is an entirely different deck. Very different than this one.
See, I had a Grismold deck. Actually, it wasn't exactly mine. It was built for my $25 deck pool that I played with a while back with my play group. And that deck felt pretty good. Notably, I didn't run a whole lot of the anti-anthems. I ran a handful of them, but I ran a lot more of the cards. They're like one-time things. And I also didn't run like that massive a number. So like I had the Golgari Charm in there. I had... what's the card? Gaze of Granite? Is that the card where you can...
Oh, like you can X0 it and destroy all non-land permanents?
Yeah, exactly. Or X2 it and destroy some mana rocks as well. And it was just like a lot of Golgari Aristocrat stuff outside of that, because you can't afford a lot of super high-tech fancy stuff for a $25 budget deck. You kind of got to go a little bit more generic. I found that version of the deck worked pretty well. And I feel like the anti-anthems are especially...
Oh yeah, no, I had Pestilence in my deck. This deck was not fun to play against.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like seeing the tokens accumulate on the board is part of the joy of playing that deck for me. I feel like if they just die immediately and you get the counters, it's probably a bit more effective as a Voltron strategy, but also I imagine more predictable.
Yeah, no, every game I won was just because I Grismold smashed someone into dust. It never came to the token plan at all. There is no token plan. It just big man, I draw 15 off species specialist naming plant, right? Like it and the token players just don't get to play. Like that was always the goal. Farrakha's a lot more fun. There's a lot more politics going on with Farrakha, like, ooh, I'll give you a death touch blocker if you don't do this or something, right? very fun card versus Grismold, which is very linear.
It's definitely it's like same colors and kind of they're both tokens decks, but not exactly.
Yeah, they're very different, but I just like to keep one of each color. I don't like to have multiple of one.
Yeah, same. I had a friend who had a Grismold deck, and I remember he took it apart because I think somewhat similar to what you said, is like every game that he won ended exactly the same. It's just like you played your thing that makes tokens get weaker. Grismold made plants. Grismold got big. Grismold smash,
Yeah, the play pattern was very linear.
Yeah, it's just kind of like if you don't do that, if your commander just gets blown up a bunch, you're like, ooh, wow, I sure do have a illness in the ranks in my hand. And it just doesn't do anything.
Oh, I remember this. Hang on. I'm looking at the deck list actively as we're talking about it. Past me did put one funny card in the deck. I put Fecundity in.
Oh, hell yeah.
That is a funny card, yes.
Very strange to put in a Grismold deck.
It's really bad in Grismold, and I actively knew it was bad when I put it in, but that wasn't the point. It was just because it was really funny. It's 2 and a green. Whenever a creature dies, that creature's controller may draw a card. So I guess Past Me still did have some concept of fun.
I feel like Grismold is an example of a broader trend where there are these commanders where you can just go all in on the command zone, just literally have your deck put itself together basically by just slamming in every possible thing that synergizes with the commander. In the case of Grismold, every single possible thing that synergizes with giving the whole table tokens. But if you do too much of that, your deck just ends up this miserable pile that just can't be a functional thing long term.
Right, it just does one thing really well and it fails at every aspect of the game outside of that. So if your one thing falters even a little bit, your deck feels abysmal,
Yeah, definitely super feast or famine. That being said, I played all the Voltron staples. Like I had Tajuru Preserver, so no one could make me sack Grismold. You had the canopy cover aspect of Mongoose, all these auras that protect Grismold and give some amount of evasion, even though he's probably already like a 14/14 trampler by the time that matters.
This is definitely something I want to make like a longer video about, because like cards like Grismold, I think you're right. Now this is like a perfect example of that. It was like on its face, it kind of builds itself and you feel like you're playing all these cool things like, oh, I'm putting Clack Bridge Troll in my deck and Hunted Troll in my deck. And, these are weird, goofy cards that give tokens to people. But then you just kind of put all of those in the deck and then it's like done and it does one thing, which is kind of odd,
Yeah.
It feels cool to build, but then it feels bad to play.
This is the thing of putting cool cards in a deck, I guess. There are a lot of cards where they will be, from a way out perspective, just looking in on the commander format. They aren't very played. Just on an abstract level, they're cool. But in the context of your specific commander, you're just throwing in a whole bunch of this one effect. And in practice, it just ends up playing like any other commander deck, just with a different flavor based on the synergy package you've created. Which I don't think that's necessarily a problem, but there are cases where, people feel excused in playing boring things because the things happen to share some lines of text with their command zone. And so it makes it cool.
Yeah. Do you see yourself ever putting this deck together again, Elk?
No, mostly because I don't imagine myself ever taking Farrakha apart. And they're both sort of black-green decks. I know they have completely separate strategies from one another. It's just, I don't want to double up on black-green. And secondly, I really am not a fan of the idea of, I don't know. It's just that this deck in particular, the one build path for me is I'm going to Voltron with Grismold. I don't really see another fun sort of path for it for me. Grismold's sort of done his thing. I think I've played 3 games with the deck and paper before I took it apart. I was like, all right, I did it, done. I've been there, done that with Grismold. Not to say he can't be interesting, but it's just, for me, I don't like the style of deck.
Yeah, I wish there was more ways to punish players in these colors for having a lot of tokens, because then you could go a route where you like don't kill the tokens, you just give them and then do something to punish them for that. But I feel like all those effects are on red, like Rakdos Charm, for example.
Yeah, well, I want to see more Rakdos Charms.
Well, yeah, I had Massacre Worm in the original deck.
Yeah, Massacre Worm works like that. What were you saying, Snail?
Oh yeah, I want more Rakdos Charms in the world. Specifically, I think Rakdos Charm is really nice because dealing damage to players equal to number of creatures is one of those things that really has to be a modal spell, or else you're just putting it in group slug decks. Or I guess you could put it in this sort of deck, but having it be modal is quite nice.
Yeah, Rakdos Charm, one of the best charms out there. It's so good. I played in a lot of commander decks.
Yeah.
Snail, do you want to give one that you have taken apart?
Sure. So technically both of mine, I didn't take them apart. They got stolen, but I wasn't sad about them getting stolen, and I haven't had any desire to play them again, so I count that as the same.
Yeah, close enough.
Close enough. My first one is my Archos deck, my Archos Maze's End deck. So this was a very silly deck that I worked very hard on. It was a fairly high power deck. Like it was pretty fast. It was just a deck with the goal of ramping fast and then playing either Reshape the Earth or Scape Shift to get a whole bunch of gates plus a Maze's End onto the battlefield. And then Archos makes everything enter untapped when he is untapped. So you can then activate Maze's End immediately and win. So it was this goofy combo deck. And it was a lot of fun to build, a lot of fun to kind of pull together and optimize, make a Maze's End deck that's as fast as possible on somewhat limited budget.
And in 3 colors.
Yeah, and in 3 colors. Yeah, exactly. But in practice, it was kind of cool, but it just wasn't that fun long-term as a deck. Like, it was an accomplishment to do this thing, but it was just that, an accomplishment isn't the same thing as a fun deck. It's the exact same thing every game. I'm trying to Maze's End. I think I eventually added in a couple other funky things. Like I added in like a Villainous Wealth and a Jingataxius Core Augur. So that gives like another bit of spice, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mentioned this deck in one of my videos. The video was cheekily named "Combos and Tutors Are Only Boring If You Are." And I mentioned the issue you had with the deck, which is that the scape shift in like the deck building doesn't come out in gameplay. Like the coolness of the deck building doesn't happen in the game because you just press the scape shift button and I win. It's not like interesting for the table that it's just a 1-card win with your commander basically after you've ramped enough.
Right.
For me, what happened with this deck, with like a combo deck that is constructed with more intention and has a lot of fun gameplay dynamics, is one of the major reasons anyway for me is that a Vindicate can answer something. My Tekkathal deck comes to mind. This deck I love. It's a pretty decently powered combo deck. It can combo pretty fast, but the combo requires like a super charged up Astral Cornucopia or Everflowing Chalice, and that needs to basically just stay in play since the early turns, and I need to start proliferating it early. If that gets blown up, I'm back to square one on the combo. So all the combos are on board and developed over time, which gives the ability for a Vindicate to answer it, right? Because a lot of people, when their frustration with combos, what it mainly comes down to is a lot of combos feel like they can only be answered with a counterspell or something along those lines. And I feel like Archos sort of fell into that problem where the combo was just from hand. It was after you did the most basic game action in the world, ramping enough, and it just worked with your commander.
Yeah, it's pretty basic. I mystical tutor before my turn to get it into hand and then do the thing. It wasn't like totally unfun. Like, I played it in some high power pods at my local game store and had a bit of fun with it, but it was kind of one-dimensional. So if you can add in more complexity to your combo, give more points of interaction for people, that can both make it more fair and give it a little bit more texture for sure.
Yeah, like I especially like that for like lower power tables. Like higher power tables where you're playing, like absolutely just like go ham, go fast. But once you hit like bracket 3,
It's also like when you're playing your sort of like incremental combo thing where you're like, I play 1 combo piece, then 2, then 3, then 4. And now I go, right? But the problem is with this, all the combo pieces are like a land and play, land and play, land and play.
Oh yeah, that's another thing too.
Yeah, how am I stopping that? Am I stone raining you? Am I Armageddoning you? Right? Like those are my 2 options. So I kind of have to just like either exclusively focus the commander down or that's it,
Even then, if you kill Archos after the scape shift and all the gates enter tapped, who cares?
Still a 1 turn.
You have 1 turn, yeah.
Yeah, it's still a 1 turn clock. You need to kill that player now.
Yeah. A funny part about the deck, and I would never bring this up in games, but technically, I think you only need to blow up like 3 of the gates, get 3 of the gates to end up in my graveyard, and then suddenly the fact that I'm playing in 3 colors becomes a really big problem for me because I run out of gates.
That is pretty funny, actually. 3 stone rains and your deck folds.
Never had that happen before.
Are you gonna ever put this deck back together?
No, it was fun to put together, but I have no desire.
I'm going to talk about my Tormod Thrasios control deck. I had this like idea for a deck where I was going to play control and I wanted to use channel cards. So I wanted to play creatures like Colossal Sky Turtle and channel it to like bounce a creature or something, and then play black effects to return creatures back to my hand, which lets Tormod the Desecrator be a win condition. He'll make zombies, And I was like constructing this deck, and I really thought that this deck was going to be like something I really loved because it's a very, very jank, wacky engine deck. So the best counter spell on a channel creature is Ghost Lit Warder. It's a blue and 1 for a 1/1. You can pay pay 4 tap and it like almost mana leaks something, counter unless they pay 2. But you could also pay 4 mana, discard it from hand, and it's a counter spell unless they pay 4, which is better mana leak, except you're paying 4 mana. So the deck's goal was to like ramp a ton so you could discard Ghostlit Wanderer to like counter something, return it back to hand with Tortured Existence or a Phyrexian Reclamation, and then use it again and like reuse it. And that was like the engine for the deck. And it would make you zombies. So you'd convert that to a win.
Yeah.
And it had some other cute packages. And I was playing like Underworld Cookbook with like Oval Chase Daredevil.
That is really bad.
For Tormod the Desecrator? Yeah, it was great. I made a dude. I really wanted to play Tackle Maggot. We'll have Yusuf put Tackle Maggot on screen. It has like a wall of text that doesn't make any sense.
The world's worst kill spell.
It was like weirdly good in this deck because I didn't really have many creatures I cared about on board. And it technically triggered Tormod, but it was really slow and bad, to be honest. But it was funny. And the whole thing is like, the list is full of a bunch of like packages that don't go together.
Yeah.
So I have like Cookbook and Overchase, but it doesn't do anything without the other stuff. I don't know. It just is so clunky. Every time I played it functionally, I wouldn't do anything. I would just have half of a bunch of different engines.
I talked about a Tormod Ramirez deck in actually the most recent video as the time we're recording this. And this sort of deck has actually got a lot of toys now. Mirror Shell Crab came out in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty.
Yeah.
That's 3 mana channel creature for a mana league. Nimble Obstructionist is actually really great for this deck.
Mm-hmm.
The big one in my mind is Insidious Roots.
Yeah, that's what made me kind of make the deck, is I added Insidious Roots and Chalk Outline.
Yeah, Insidious Roots is incredible with this sort of strategy. Not to get too deck construction-y here, but one of my favorite things to do when I played Tormod and Ramirez was Tortured Existence with Gem Palm Polluter. Gem Palm Polluter is a 6 mana 4/2 zombie. Its stats doesn't matter. It has black cycling, and if you cycle it, target player loses life equal to the number of zombie creatures in play, and then you can Tortured Existence it back to your hand, and all of this is at instant speed. So for every 3 black mana you pay, you can just have a target player lose life equal to the number of zombies you control, all while holding up counter magic. And each time you do that loop, you get +1 zombie, which is utterly hilarious. I don't know if you know about that.
That's a pretty fun package.
It's pretty funny, yeah. I mean, those are things that I probably should have included if I had kept tuning the deck instead of just taking it apart, to be honest.
I explained for reasons in my video. Like, for me, mostly why I don't have Tormod and Ramirez is it kind of like steps on Farrakha's turf a little bit, where Farrakha really does care about cards leaving the graveyard, which is what Tormod's doing here. And it's just a Demir version of my black-green deck, which is just like, why have 2 of one thing that works well already? So that's where I landed on that. But overall, I do like Tormod in the command zone. It's a very fun card to build around.
Me too.
I don't know if you've had this experience, Con, but something I noticed with my skeleton ship deck back when I had that, it was this very janky suppressive deck. And what that meant was that a lot of games, it would just be too slow if other decks were a lot better. But in the games where it was good, it was gross. I could just get crazy numbers of counters, Lux Cannon something every turn, do all sorts of proliferate bullshit to slow down the table. What's the blue card that exiles lands?
Parallax Tide.
Parallax Tide, yeah. Just like there were all these tools to suppress opponents, but the deck was also slow. So either it would do nothing or it would get really gross.
Okay, listen, once you've exiled all of someone's lands, if they don't scoop, that's their problem. If the game takes
I mean, this deck didn't have any like land destruction, but it is exactly what you're describing, is when you had the full engine, when you had Insidious Roots and like Tortured Existence and the channel creature in hand and a way to like loop it back, then we would get enough mana by tapping all the tokens that you could just counter everything that people played. And it's crazy, but that's like so many cards and so much mana.
I'm going to break out some more Farrakha tech for everyone here. If you run Tortured Existence, Insidious Roots, and Tyvar Jubilant Brawler, the 3 mana planeswalker that has a effect similar to Thousand Year Elixir, all your creatures can tap as though they had haste. You have infinite plants in that case, because you can just bouncy house 2 creatures in and out of the graveyard and just tap the new plant every time. And the plants all grow. They all get +1/+1 counter because Insidious Roots like does everything on planet Earth. Like this card does everything. It's so good.
I didn't have any combos intentionally because I really wanted to win with Tormod.
Yeah, that's fair. Like absolutely, if you just want to like not shortcut Tormod, that's entirely true. I do like Wonder in this style of deck as well, because it's just so easy to just pitch it into the graveyard and then everything is flying.
Yeah. I miss Mystic Genesis. That card is unbelievably bad. 2 green, blue for an instant. You counter a spell and you make an XX ooze where X is that spell's mana cost. I just think it's funny. It's really bad though. It's a terrible counterspell.
This is the world's worst, like frilled mystic snake kind of deal.
Yeah.
Because you can't flicker the ooze to counter another thing.
No, it's really bad. It's just really funny when they cast an X spell. They're like Torment of Hailfire for 10, and
You
I was
just
like,
turn
that's a
into
12
sludge.
12 ooze for me.
I feel like that's such a you reason to hate this card. Al.
Why?
You can't flicker
What
it.
did I can't flicker it for more counter spells. No, I'm caught.
Yeah, I love my awful 5-mana counter spells. I love playing the worst 5-mana counters in the game.
Rebel called out one that was really fun in my I asked content creators video. Access denied. It makes a bunch of Thopters based on the mana value of the spell you countered. Oh, that's
Love me that card.
That card sucks so bad, but it's so funny.
Overwhelming intellect will always be the GOAT.
Okay, that's another banger. I also want to say Oversimplify. I don't have it in a deck right now because I took a deck apart. But when I was playing it, this card is crazy. This card's so good.
I don't know if you remember this. This was really like months ago, Con. We talked about Oversimplify in the Better Booster video. That was like our first collab on your channel.
Our first collab, yeah.
Yeah, I called it dog. That card sucks.
I mean, hey, let's have a tiebreaker. Snail, what do you think? Oversimplify, good,
I think
bad?
the fact that it's in colors that don't have great board wipes makes it decent.
All right, we have a fence sitter.
I'm not going to call it great, but it's solid. I like it.
Yusef does point something out. Dog cause dog and art. That is very true. I suppose I'll talk about my next one.
Yeah.
My next deck is Thalisse, Reverent Medium. Thalisse is a 5-mana 4/3. So she's 3 white-black for a human cleric. At the beginning of each end step, create X 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying, where X is the number of tokens you've created this turn. Gotta say, this deck was really fun. It's really incredibly boring. This is the world's most boring Orzhov tokens deck in the world. That being said, don't care what you think. I like it when I have 40 dudes in play. This deck was awesome, but I took it apart, and it was mostly because it was competing with God Eternal Oketra, and God Eternal Oketra was a lot more fun for me to actually like play because I just liked the aesthetic of the commander a lot more, and I liked that I could just like spam 4/4s onto the board like nonstop. This deck basically died, Thalisse, the moment Defiler of Faith got printed, which says whenever there's a white in a permanent's mana cost, you can pay a Phyrexian white instead. So you can pay 2 life for White Mane Lion and a generic. And if you had a Oketra's Monument or a Pearl Medallion out, it's just 2 life to make a 4/4, which just sent Oketra into overdrive. I eventually ended up taking Oketra apart too. Thalisse would be a deck that I would consider rebuilding if I didn't already have a tokens deck in the form of Farrakha, because Thalisse can make like the widest boards on planet Earth. Like, I've never seen larger boards than a Thalisse player that has been left alone for a turn. This is because you are encouraged to play on each turn. So treasures from Smothering Tithe, for instance, will make you a treasure token on each end step. Rabble Rousing, you attack with all your spirits. You make that many 1/1s, and then you make that many spirits on the end step. By the way, those are all doubled if you have Anointed Procession. So you attack with Rabble Rousing, you get twice as many number equal to the number of creatures you control, and then you get quadruple basically at the end step, that many spirits, which is just like absurd.
All right, because it's going to double twice.
Yeah, because it counts the number of tokens you made. So if you have a token doubler like Anointed Procession, it doubles, and then Thalisse sees, oh, you made this many tokens, let's do that, and then you get doubled again because of the Anointed Procession there. Yeah, Grand Crescendo was a protection spell that protected my board, but it also, you make 5 1/1s that turns into 10, that turns into 20 on the end step, you untap with that, you're just winning the game at that
That card
point.
is so good, by the way.
Yeah, I love Grand Crescendo. Big shout out here. Not enough people play this. Do not put Moonshaker Cavalry in this deck. All the spirits already have flying. You know what's infinitely better than Moonshaker Cavalry? Maw of the Obsidat. Sacrifice a creature. Creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. When you have 40 creatures, this kills the whole table for 5 mana. Moonshaker Cavalry kills the whole table for 8.
Oh, I love the art on the Obsidat. It's so flavorful. It's so good.
It's so long since I've seen this card. I think I got this in my first draft ever. That's awesome.
You know what else I ran in this deck that was unironically goated was Strixhaven Stadium. It was a 3-mana mana rock that put Thalisse into play a turn early on curve. And then also when I just made like 50 spirits, everyone died.
I'm kind of a Strixhaven Stadium hater.
Strixhaven Stadium is hilarious.
I mean, it's funny, and like in this deck, it's like probably fine. But every time I've seen it, what happens is like somebody plays it and they're like, I'm gonna ramp with my mana rock. And then everybody goes, holy cow, they're going to win. And they just like dogpile that player and obliterate them. And I'm like, oh, you killed yourself with a 3-mana mana rock. That's crazy.
The deck was a lot of fun to play. For me nowadays, part of me understands that Thalisse is a little glass cannon-y. She is just a 5-mana 3/4. She will die. So it sucks that the only backup plan this deck kind of has is just I Ink Shield, right? There is some game plan in there. Like you can like have Adeline Divine Visitation, and that's a perfectly respectable engine that makes you 3/4/4s every turn. Like that's commendable. And there's enough protection that it doesn't end up really mattering a lot. Like if you get to untap with Thalisse, the game basically is over because you can just protect your board for the rest of time. But yeah, overall, the deck for me just did the same thing as another deck that I had at the time, Oketra. So I ended up taking it apart because it was just too similar play pattern. And then also on top of that, it just didn't feel like mine. You know, Thalisse kind of just felt like everyone's. It was just an Orzhov kind of slop deck.
Right, what part of it is yours?
So Thalisse is such a classic like amplifier commander. Like you just, if you make tokens, you make that many tokens plus that many spirits. Have some spirits. It's very kind of straightforward. And I feel like maybe if it included more colors, like if it had red in it as well, you could have a little bit more spice in there. But there's really like not that many correct
then it's
ways.
just gonna be impact tremors.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, well, the thing is that this deck is just impact tremors. You have the new Cabal that says whenever a token enters, you drain each of your opponents. And then there's Corpse Knight. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses life. So there's already impact tremors for this deck. I actually ran Corpse Knight back in the day.
Wait, isn't Cabal once per turn or is
no? Cabal steals a token once per turn whenever an opponent makes a token. Whenever any number of tokens enter, Cabal just drains. Period.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that card's crazy, by the way. So Cabal Profiteer Mayor is like an absurd card.
The card goes pretty hard.
But it's one or more, each opponent loses one. So.
Oh, another card I wanted to shout out was Starlight Spectacular. That card also owns. In any deck where you have evasive tokens already, it's better than Moonshaker Cavalry. Easily.
Yeah, Starlight Spectacular goes pretty hard.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
The fact that it's an unset card means that it doesn't get that much play, even though it's legal. Though.
Yeah. Sorry for the podcast listeners. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose creatures you control one at a time until each creature you control has been chosen, and then they get in order +0, +0, +1, +1, +2, +2, etc. until you're done. So it's pretty funny.
And it is keyworded parade.
Parade. Yeah, it's awesome.
One thing that I like about this commander is it does say each end step. One thing that I really like about like commanders that care or decks that care about things on each end step or, you know, play things at instant speed is I feel like whenever I'm playing something like that, I'm always a little bit more engaged with the game as opposed to where I just attack, turn everything sideways and go, all right, I'm done, I'll pass turn, and like I can disengage.
Yeah, it was really strong. And it was also really fun too, because like I was incentivized to play on each player's turn, like you said. Mm-hmm. It was really funny sometimes though, because I'd have Thalisse out and someone would swing like murder amounts of damage at me, and I'd go Ink Shield, and then I'd get like that many spirits as well, and then I'd win the game twice as hard. It would be awesome.
All right, should I get into my second one?
Yeah.
It was taken apart for kind of similar reasons to this one. It was my Glissa Sunslayer Battlecruiser deck. This deck is very much an homage to my original commander deck, which was a Shieldred, like the original one, mono black, just stuff deck. It was a mono black deck. It did mono black stuff. It ran too much removal. I liked removal a lot. Doomblade was my favorite card in the game. But the thing that I enjoyed about this deck was just getting a bunch of mana doublers online and drawing a ton of cards with like a Necropotence or something, and then just kind of flexing on the whole table, being this like big, powerful deck with all the resources. And so that's what I was shooting for with the Glissa deck on some level. So I had a whole bunch
of
Glissa
Sunslayer?
Glissa Sunslayer, yes.
Oh. Okay.
So I had.
I thought you said Sunseeker. I'm just looking at this.
Oh, no. So the deck has a whole bunch of ramp, whole bunch of removal, whole bunch of big old creatures, draw, etc. And it was fine, but I found that it was just a little bit oppressive. I wanted it to be my like default deck that I could just pull out if I wanted to have a fun time, you know, getting too much mana and too many cards and, you know, just having too much volume of gameplay, just being the big bad. But the sheer amount of removal that a black version of this involves, even when I like toned it back a little bit, like it still was ending up just kind of this oppressive deck that tried to gain control over the state of the game. So I ended up basically replacing this with my Rata deck as my kind of big bad deck, because that's a deck that is a little bit lower powered than this, and it kind of relinquishes a little bit of control over the game. It can't answer as many things, but the trade-off for it is that I get to have this experience even a little bit amplified and have a wacky old time of it.
For me, a lot of the problems with my decks is not that they're too tuned or anything. It's that I will often undershoot because I'm like, ooh, this card's a little mean, right? So I won't put it in. And then I'll play a game game and I'll be like, man, really love a Drannith Magistrate in my hand right now. I never let the voices win on that one, but recently I put Elishnorn Mother of Machines in my white-green deck, my Kellen deck, and she's never coming out of that deck ever again. I was up against a landfall player and they were still drawing cards and they were still like, you know, dropping a million lands into play with Gitrog Ravenous Ride, but they weren't killing the table actively. Someone joked that my Elishnorn was like the Iron Dome, actively protected her. That's some of my favorite like interaction with stacks pieces is when someone else protects your stacks piece because it's helping them live. But for me, it's like I start out too weak on decks and I end up upgrading them over time to fit everything versus like this deck's way too strong or like it takes over the game too easily with Glissa's case where it's just like black-green pile.
It's not even it was necessarily too strong for the games I was playing it in, although that was the case sometimes. It was just weak to some things, aggro and combo, and it was just brutally powerful against others. It would just, I think I called it mid-range Crusher 5000 for a while because it would just murder conventionally built mid-range decks. It would just get way more value than them and wipe the board and sit all over them.
So it's one of these decks where it would like beat other fair decks, but it crumpled immediately in response to any amount of unfairness.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. That's how I felt about my Mina and Den list. This is like, I'm just ramping into like the big things and smashing you. And if you are trying to ramp into things, I'm ramping faster than you and I'm smashing harder than you. So like, you know, you can't beat me at this.
Yeah, sorry. There's this concept in other formats, especially Legacy, of unfair decks and fair decks. Unfair decks just generally refers to like combo-y sort of decks that win without combat. And then fair decks are decks that beat combo player to death with efficient creatures or stacks pieces or what have you. Like Death and Taxes is like a fair deck. You can't see the air quotes I'm doing. But the whole dynamic there is that you can build a deck that can beat other fair decks very well. And so you'll win every fair matchup, but you'll lose every unfair matchup if you go too greedy. So I'm imagining sort of Glissa in that sort of realm where like you are dead to combo, but you can certainly beat the hell out of a mid-range player.
Yeah. I think also kind of relating to what you said about Mina and Dan Khan, I found that taking the like turbo ramping strategy and just turning down the power level just a little bit and putting in some more weaknesses really made it more enjoyable. Like I found that a $50 budget is so good for that because you just can't fit in the stuff needed to make a truly disgusting pub stomper deck. Like it's gonna have weaknesses. I just think that style of deck is better suited for lower powers, but I know I get constant comments of people asking how to upgrade decks I think belong at mid power, so I don't know.
You know, actually that, you know, this perfectly ties in to the next deck I was going to talk about that I took apart. So Mina and Den, I kind of hadn't played for a while and I just generally like didn't use it for very long because I moved away from my play group. That was like my high power play group because it used to be I would just play like my stacks decks and my strong decks and combo decks and all that crap with my friends. And then I just wouldn't play them at like local game stores. And now since I'm playing more with like random patrons or at random local game stores and blah, 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 then I just end up not using those. But one thing that I think is interesting and that I've kind of kept me and Den around and I'm continuing to keep it around for is brackets themselves, because I can say bracket 4 now. Like I have a word for it as opposed to just vaguely saying high power and then people have a better idea of what it is.
Yeah, it's no longer caught in the limbo between like 9 and 10, which is like where CEDH and high power blur.
Right, like people wouldn't know what I meant when I said high power, but now it's got a little bit more definition. So I feel like I'm more confident in being able to like, all right, we're playing bracket 4, I can bring this out. So the deck I'm going to talk about that I did take apart is Dihada. So I built a Dihada Binder of Wills deck. She's Mardu in 1 for a 5 loyalty planeswalker, and we can get to that in a second. She has the text, she could be your commander, so you can use it in the command zone. As +2, one target legendary creature gains Vigilance, Lifelink, Indestructible until your next turn. Not relevant for the deck. She had an ultimate, which is gain control of all non-land permanents until end of turn, untap them, they gain haste. Wasn't relevant for the deck. The entire reason the commander was in the deck was for the -3.
Yeah.
Which is reveal the top 4 cards of your library, put any number of legendary cards from among them to your hand and the rest in the graveyard. And then you make a treasure token for each card milled this way.
Yeah, just always 0. Always just make like infinite treasure.
Exactly.
This is meant to be a Legends Matter planeswalker, and you can just build her as not Legends Matter. She's just a sorcery that makes like 4 treasure tokens.
4 treasures, exactly. Yeah. So the deck was play a 2-mana rock, play Dihada on 3, minus, get 4 treasures. And if she didn't die, the next turn you would just cast like Hops or Obliterate, and then you could just plus Dihada and minus for more mana to just then cast your things and then attack for the win.
Yeah, like it's so ridiculous that what I hate about Dihada is that her design is obviously meant to be a Legends Matter Mardu Planeswalker that can be a commander, but it just does not matter. She just vomits treasures onto the board, regardless if you've built around the Legends Matter thing or not, right?
Yeah, it turns out 4 mana, make 4 treasures is actually just a good Magic the Gathering card.
Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous.
I feel like I can see the like vibe of the person designing this. They were like wanting to give out little like participation trophies to not make the Legends players feel bad when they, hit a bunch of lands, but the participation trophies are like solid gold. So now everybody just wants to participate.
That's a good anecdote. I like that.
Yeah. So that was the deck. It was just a stacks deck. And I played this with my friends that are like, high power pods. It was super sweet. I thought it was Mardu stacks, there's so many like interesting pieces for it, but I like literally never brought it to a game store. I literally never used it. But now if I'm at the game store and people are like, hey, bracket 4, I actually might put this deck back together again and I don't know, give it a whirl. If people are actually regularly playing bracket 4, I can actually play stacks again.
I don't know if I agree with you, because it sounds like you go skip turn 1, turn 2, Mana Rock, turn 3, Dihada minus, turn 4, if you're not dead now, you win, which is like, it sounds like a pretty bad play pattern to just be like, guys, you need to kill me on turn 4 or else I win, which is like, I guess that's what high power is all about, but it feels incredibly linear in this case.
So when I played it ended up not being very linear, because the thing about like generally when playing at like high power is everyone's got interaction. I'm soaking up a counter spell with my Hops, but then you still got to answer the Dihada, and I'm going to start plussing, and then I'm eventually going to minus. And then if you soak up a counter spell on the Hops, maybe I'm casting a stacks piece, or I could do the inverse, right? I could play a stacks piece that I know you need to answer, and then save the mass land destruction for later. And, so like, yes, it is linear in that sense, minus interaction. And generally people playing at like higher power tables and stuff are playing more interaction. So it ends up not being, it's the same thing with like CDH, right? Like you could look at any CDH deck and go, oh, you just go like, Thassa's Oracle Consultation. But 99% of the time, the first person who goes Thassa's Oracle Consultation, expend all their fast mana on turn 1, instantly loses. Like they never actually win the game. And because of that, the games end up being a lot more varied.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, this also just kind of illustrates what different deck builders we are. I build decks to just like do like 50 different things. Like no 2 games are kind of similar to one another. You are like, I'm here for the dopamine and I'm going to just immediately scrap this deck after I do the thing. I mean, that being said, your Mina and Den list has survived the test like of time.
I mean, I don't think so actually, right? So although yes, I do sometimes, there's a lot of decks I've played once and then went, wow, I did the thing, and then I scrapped it or whatever. But I don't think any of my current decks are like that.
I remember you vividly telling me, I'm not just saying this because I'm like assuming, it's like, I remember you telling me like, I build decks and like, I'll typically just take them apart after they do the thing. Like you have a revolving door of decks more so than I do.
Yeah, I did that with like Toulouse. I think I played that once. And then I scrapped it.
And then
I do that sometimes when like Foxglove. Yeah, well, that felt bad. That was more like, I think Tempt with Discovery is like cyberbullying against players. That was my real problem. And like tempting contract. Oh man, that just felt bad. That felt
you
like
should just do a tempting contract Dihada deck. Except tempting contract is just worse than Dihada, since Dihada is just a tempting contract where everyone always says yes.
Yeah, that's true.
True.
Yeah, so I do agree that I sometimes build decks they are set out to do a funky goal and then they get scrapped when I do that. And maybe Dihada is like that, but I didn't feel that way when I was playing with my friends. The games felt varied enough that I liked it. I just took it apart because I never used it. I didn't have a place for it.
I'm curious, what have you had the consistent experience that there's usually not high power casual at game stores? I know at my local game store, CEDH and mid power are both more popular, but there are occasionally games of that, and they definitely seem to happen. In my experience,
it's really, really rare, because the problem is people like to talk about like stacks pieces being like the big scary thing, but it is unbelievable. Like you can't play Obliterate in a CDH deck. Like you're just gonna lose. It can't, like the deck is way.
Even a good one like Armageddon is like literally stone cold unplayable.
Yeah, they're terrible. They're terrible. Any of the Humility is also almost entirely unplayable as well. Like any stacks piece you can think of is basically useless at CDH outside of like Trinisphere and like a few very specific ones. Blood Moon.
Torpor Orb's pretty good. good. Like you have a Hushbringer or two.
Humility has play in some. Doesn't Humility have some play in some tier 2 decks, like with partner pairs?
It's in Shorakai, I think. I think that's it.
It's in like the bird deck.
What? Bird deck?
The decks that contain the bird, decks that contain the 5-mana Planeswalker guy. I wish I knew the name of cards, but I don't.
You're talking about Ishai, and you're also talking about Tevet Zot.
Yes. I feel like I've
Wait,
seen...
does Tevish Zot play Humility?
It would make sense. You make thralls with it. It's kind of funny.
Oh, Tevish Zot's the Planeswalker. Yeah. Is Tevish Zot good? There's Tevish Zot Crom, which is good.
There's Tevish Zot CEDH decks, absolutely. They're heroes, but they exist.
I'm not saying these are meta decks, but I'm saying, these...
Yeah.
There are a couple Humility decks that have seen some play, I think, in CDH.
They exist. Just generally, they're like not super common. Stacks right now is just not super good in the meta in general. It's a lot more like grindy blue mid-range. So generally, I mean, like you can play it, but it's like I'd rather just play my more CDH adjacent deck if I'm playing CDH, and have like a better chance at like doing something. If I'm trying to take like Doretti stacks or like something random like that, it's like way too slow for CDH. You kind of just get blown out. And I've very rarely seen any, at least at the LGSs I've gone to, nobody's really playing high power. Everything's like upgraded precon / like mid power, like lowish mid power. It's pretty rare that I find a high power pod.
Interesting.
To close out this conversation about Dihada, I have seen one cool Dihada deck. It was one where they put Luxior on her, and then she's now a legendary creature that you can use her +1 on.
To give herself indestructible?
To give herself indestructible until your next turn. And then you could start swinging with her with Luxior and stuff.
How does that work on a Planeswalker? Do they not take, like, loyalty?
So if they take damage, they'll lose loyalty. But they can't be kill spelled, for instance.
It's not that good.
Okay,
it's not that good. It's not a good deck. It's really funny,
pretty
though.
bad.
It wasn't a good deck, but it was really funny to have like Planeswalker, Voltron. That was pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
All right.
Man, I want to do background Voltron, where I like animate a background and attack with it.
True.
That's an iconic one, especially with Raised by Giants, because it'll just be a 10/10.
Yeah.
Anyway, do we want to move on to Beseech the Mirror?
Sure.
I think so. Maybe we can answer a question from Spotify. If the website decides that questions exist.
Questions allowed.
Are questions allowed? Oh, here we go. Oh, look at that. A good question from Spotify, and I can see it. It's a miracle. Moving on to the Beseech the Mirror section, where you can ask us questions. You just need to put mirror, mirror in the comment so we can search it up better. This one comes from Spotify. Flesh Robot asks, mirror, mirror, I gift a random opponent my graveyard to beseech thee. What's a niche archetype you would want to see more support cards for?
Oh, I'm actually really excited about this one because I know it's going to happen. If you look at the Edge of
He's a wizard. He knows.
I know the future. No, it's the Edge of Eternities spoiler stuff where we saw the commander like face stuff. The Jeskai one says charge up or whatever, something. It's going to be charge counter proliferate. We're going to get more blue proliferate in that for my Tekkathal deck. And it'll be really fun. And I'll jump up and down and go, yay! So yeah, that'll be a fun time when we get more charge counters, because I need that in my life.
What about you, Snailman? Any?
I don't know that I have an archetype exactly. I just know I have a card called Enigmatic Incarnation that I've been trying to build around forever. It's a 4-mana enchantment on the beginning of your end step. You may sacrifice another enchantment. If you do, you search your library for a creature card with convert mana cost equal to 1 plus the sacrifice enchantment's convert mana cost. Put that onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So this is a birthing pod that turns enchantments into creatures, and I just want more. Duskmourn brought a bunch more enchantment creatures, which definitely helps, but I just want more like weird enchantment synergies that I can work this into.
Yeah, of course, because you can chain enchantment creatures with that. You can go +1, oop, I go into an enchantment creature, and that's now an enchantment still. For you to go +1 into again.
The options have expanded a little bit, but I still am not quite putting together something that makes sense. I want more weird enchantment bullshit.
Did you know that this is a real deck in the Pioneer metagame?
Yes.
Because you can play Overlord of the Mistmourns for 4 mana for its impending cost, but then you get to sack it as a 7-drop, and you can put Atraxa Grand Unifier into play.
Yep.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it's kind of cool. You also can curve it a little better. You can go Overlord of the Flood Pits, Enigmatic, and then Enigmatic will sack into Overlord of the Mistborns, and then it'll sack it into Atraxa, which is kind of cool. It's not the best deck in Pioneer, but it's neat.
Yeah.
Would recommend if you're playing Pioneer.
Who's playing Pioneer?
I don't know. I have no idea. Someone in the comments, if you're playing Pioneer, please let us know. I actually don't want Wizards to support any niche archetype. And I've been playing with the card Break Through the Lines for like a while. It's just like this red enchantment. It makes power 2 or less creatures. Like
Gives them haste and unblockable.
Give them haste and unblockable, yeah. And I'd been playing with the card for a while because I was like, oh, there's all these red cards that care about like power 2 or less. And then they just printed a commander for it. In my mind at first, I was like, oh, I'll build Arabella, the abandoned doll.
Yeah.
Arabellum?
Arabella.
Yeah, Arabella, abandoned doll. Yes. There we go. They printed a commander for it. And initially, my first thought was like, oh, I could just add white to my goofy Grenzo deck that was playing. Maybe I was playing a Martyr deck at the time. I could add, this to that theme, and then like I have a commander for it. And then the whole deck, builds around it. And then I was like, but like, I don't know. It like lost the magic to me.
Yeah, this is definitely the question of game design that Wizards of the Coast has on their hands, because on the one hand, personally, as an experienced player, I would prefer that they go with as like a cube designer mindset. I wish they would like try and tie in things creatively with existing archetypes, doing kind of subtle connections to things. But at the same time, there's a whole lot of players who probably want to be smacked on the head with an archetype, having a commander exactly for it given to them. So I don't know. It's tough to say.
I talked about this a little bit in one of my videos. It was the fact that it feels like a lot of designs are meant to be ran in packages. So like energy, for instance, is very parasitic. You need to run all the energy cards together that you can that are somewhat good.
Yeah.
And it's like the deck builds itself. I was having a little bit of that problem with Farrakha because Omzu, Skeleton Crew, Insidious Roots, Chalk Outline, all these cards in Murders at Karlov Manor that says create one or more cards or creature cards leave your graveyard. It triggers and does something cool. And then we got one in Duskmourn 2 with the Defiled Crypt Cadaver Lab that also triggers, makes a token. So we had all these cards that trigger, make a token whenever a thing leaves the graveyard. I've cut all of those cards except for 2 because actually they ended up being bad. Like despite being like, this is exactly what your deck wants to do. Look, your deck does this thing, put this in because it has the words on it. They ended up not being what the deck needed, which in hindsight was actually like kind of nice to know that it was just not actually right to run these cards, despite them on the surface looking like they synergized. So I don't think in the end, it's really that big of a deal, but it definitely feels a bit bad when you have like the secret tech and then it just gets like a precon printed that just does everything that your secret little niche deck did. But every mechanic's niche until it gets enough support. If we got energy sets like back to back for a year or two, energy would just become the 6th color of mana. I guess 7th after colorless, but still.
Yeah.
I think Gates is an interesting example of this because obviously there was the initial set of Gates with the Maze's End. All of the Gate synergy cards, not all. There were a couple decent ones, like Crackling Perimeter was kind of okay, but like there were a lot of really bad Gate synergy cards and there were only 10 Gates.
Yeah, they were meant for limited, it felt like.
Yeah, exactly. So the original Gates deck was this like crazy nutty hipster thing. And then they printed a whole bunch more Gates. Now, I think that's probably broadly good for the Gates archetype, that it now isn't just this kind of niche backwater thing that only a handful of devoted,
Ravnica enjoyers can do.
Return to Ravnica enjoyers use. But also, obviously it is less niche now. It probably
like Basilisk Gate flat out can be a better win condition than Maze's End sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. So it's interesting to think about the trade-offs with something like that.
Please, Wizards, because I know you're listening. Don't make a salvaging station commander bauble specific. Please don't do that. I do not want the next precon to be like trinkets.
It's only a matter of time, Con. There's no way they don't tap into the Trinket Mage nostalgia.
No, please. No, they don't care about that cycle. They added Transit Mage and they skipped one on purpose.
Yeah,
so
it's true.
I know
It gets 4 and 5. They shortcutted.
Well, yeah, I feel like 4 and 5 are weird mana costs. Would you have wanted them to make separate ones for 4 and 5?
Yes, on principle.
But 6 or greater, that's breaking the principle.
What would the 5 one even be called? So let's say 4.
No, there's 1 or less, 6 or greater, and then you have 1 for each in between.
Well, so 4 would be Transit Mage. What would be 5? It has to start with
it
the
could be
T.
anything.
Okay, Con, I have an argument for you. So,
Tornado Mage.
Tornado Mage.
The average card has a mana cost of 2.5, right? Something like that ish. So you have the 2 mages on 2 and 3, Trophy Mage and Tribute Mage. They each grab 1 card mana value, and then you have the 2 on either side, Trinket Mage and Transit Mage, that grab 2 mana values, and then you have the 1 further out that grabs more. Isn't that kind of, have you thought about that?
And then you have Fabricate, which is what the card that you should just be running.
Mages are cool.
You can blink them. What are you talking about?
Flicker them.
You can flicker them. You're right. Yeah, that is the one thing that they're better at.
Look, there's 284 artifacts that are mana value 5. That's plenty.
How many of them are fucking Meteorite? Because that shit you do not want to tutor for. I'll scoop out of like pity.
There's Alhammert's Archive, Conjurer's Closet, Coat of Arms, Throne of Eldraine, Eldrazi Monument.
Conjurer's Closet for the 5-mana artifact toolbox loops.
Oh my god, it would have been so cool. It would have been a great card.
No, you flicker it the first time and then you get Panharmonicon and you start getting 2 every turn.
Oh, wait, hold up. Wait a second.
Wait.
You made this cool. You made this cool.
I eventually need to make a deck that has all 5 of these stupid mages in there, but
I'm running 4 of them, but in my Shroom Slide deck, but there just aren't good artifacts on
There becomes a point where you've put enough mages in your deck that it becomes comical. Like when you have Trinket Mage, Transit Mage, Tribute Mage, and they're all right next to each other, you should put the first Fabricate in.
Why? I want mages.
I feel like this is like this is a bracket 1 list where like the whole deck is like some sort of like circular loop where I like get the Transit Mage for the Conjurer's Closet to get the Panharmonicon to get something that searches the other ones, and like that's the goal of the deck.
This reminds me of when I tried to build like the Magus of the Cycle deck. It was like a 5-color deck that just put every Magus of the blank in the deck. Just because they all had the same name, I was a little EDH baby. I was like, oh, look at all these stupid cards. I'm going to play them all together.
Could also throw all the Spell Shapers in as well. Get full creatures doing funny things.
Oh, my friend had a 5-color Spell Shaper deck.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned this.
I think Kenrith was the commander. Dude, that deck was so bad. It was awesome.
Okay, hang on. By the way, we are incredibly off the rails. Let's get one more question in.
I love being off the rails.
I had one more question lined up, yeah. Okay. This comes from Sam Acorn 0325, and they ask, Mirror, mirror, I'm new to Magic. What are your honest thoughts on Shadowborn Apostle? I'm making a Shadowborn Apostle deck, but I don't know how good it is. Now, I wanted to expand this a little bit to just talking about cards that you can run any number of. General thoughts on that? Strategy, theme, idea?
You can already do this with Llanowar Elves, Fyndhorn Elves. No, I'm joking. It's tough because there's some cool things you can do with them, but I feel like a lot of the decks end up the same. So for me, gosh, I wish I just had like a tier list of them in order, because I think Heir Apparent is like the most stone cold, boring thing you can ever play in your entire life. That's one end of the spectrum. I think the other end of that spectrum is, whoa, it's super cool that Slime Against Humanity, you can Serum Powder your first hand away, and then your first slimes are actually like really good because it's like
that is cool. Wait, that's actually sick.
Yeah, you can Serum Powder away your first hand, and it's like if you had 4 oozes in that hand, all of your first ooze is that much bigger. And then also you can do like Slime Against Humanity, and then after the first one, you Surgical Extraction it from your graveyard in a Golgari deck, and now all of your Slimes Against Humanity are just like colossal threats because you exiled like 20 of them. That's cool. I kind of like that. There was a really funny joke deck that was pushed around. I think Veggie Wagon did a video on it. That was Persistent Petitioner's Slime Against Humanity. And then you milled yourself, and it was the Catilda and Lier team up deck. Whenever you played a human, you could flash something back. So all of your humans are Snapcaster Mage. And then you play the Slime Against Humanity, and it doesn't matter that it gets exiled because once again, Slime Against Humanity sees everything in the graveyard, right? So Slime Against Humanity has all this cool play, but something like Relentless Rats, it's like, what are you doing that's super cool with Relentless Rats? Like you have Jared, Lich Lord, and you sack it because it has a huge power because you have a bunch of rats, and then Blood Bond March triggers when you cast your next one, you bring all the rats back. Like that's the extent of the coolness with the Rat Colony or the Relentless Rats. Templar Knight, what are you doing? You're just getting Thrumming Stone. Great job, very creative deck. Like, you know, like you on one end, you can build them very boring. On the other end, you can build them really cool. Templar Knight, this is my Templar Knight deck. I'm going to get Circle of the Round Table or whatever it's called that gives all knights +2/+2. Yep. Like, that's kind of funny. I like that quite a bit, actually. So, like, I don't know. You can be boring or as cool with any of these cards as you want, despite them being like, I can just run any numbers. Shadowborn Apostles also fits in that loop.
Yeah, well. I mean, talk about like linearity, right? You know, if you thought that Dihada build sounded linear, like you're literally playing and drawing the exact same card 6 times in a game or whatever, you know? And I think if you don't mind I am going to Persistent Petitioners, Slime Against Humanity, and like my deck is literally like there's no other non-lands in the deck. That's basically all the list does. If you don't mind that, then you should go for it because, you know, but if you want a deck that like has all these different angles and can like do this and is adaptable, and if the plan goes wrong, you can do this instead, you just don't have that with these decks because you're playing so much of the same card, literally. The only exception I think is Templar Knights is because it's a toolbox.
I think on some level, these sort of decks do make decent kind of first decks for a player just because there are fewer things to keep track of. You know, when you make changes to your deck, you can change out a handful of cards and that will have, you know, a bigger impact. Whereas if you have to like come up with every single card in the 99 rather than, coming up with the 20 spare slots you have, then suddenly you have a lot more things to figure out. You've got a lot more kind of balls in the air. It's kind of harder to see changes pan out.
His balls are in the air.
Balls in the air.
Well, I was going to talk about edging, like Edgewalker with the Shadowborn Apostles. Like, all I'm saying is, like there's a lot of this, like there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with this. But I'm happy that these cards exist. You know what I mean?
Agreed. Has anyone played against like a Dragon's Approach deck?
I have, yeah.
No.
There used to be a guy at my game store who played a Dragon's Approach. Gosh, what was the name of the commander? It adds a bunch of red mana, second main.
Neheb.
Yeah,
Neheb,
dude.
Yeah, so you go Dragon's Approach, second main, trigger. Oop, I make, a billion mana, Dragon's Approach, or you just cast the dragon that you just drew, right? So, I mean, that's just all the deck was. It's like, if you grave hated them, or if you killed Neheb, the deck really didn't do much. I think they swapped it out for Urabrask when the new Urabrask came out, the one that actually has like the it's like Bergie.
It's like a storm thing. Yeah.
They swapped it out for that, but still it was just like, just grave hate them or kill Urabrask and they can't do it as fast. Shadowborn Apostle is also really funny with Keurig, isn't it?
I think it's funny with it's kind of interesting with what's his name? The Erebos, God of the Dead, the one that's like, which one is it? The one that's like the
not Erebos, you're thinking of Athreos, God of Passage.
Thank you. I think Athreos got a passage. Thank you. Because if an opponent ever gets to 2 or 1 life specifically, you can keep targeting them with Athreos triggers. And since they can't pay the 3 life, you just always get the creatures back and you can do weird loops.
Even before then, do you want to pay 18 for my Shadowborn Apostles I just sacked?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I would pay all but one of my life to make sure an opponent didn't draw like a card. Like,
yeah,
I always deny on the Palantir Orthonk. Like, but yeah, no, like, it still does a lot of damage even before that. And you still get to run Edgewalker in that deck too.
Yeah.
Which is, of course, like just the most broken Shadowborn Apostle thing you can do, which is just like pew, 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 pew. They're all free. 1 black, sack. Okay, I'll get my big stupid 8 mana demon that is a wound reflection that I forgot the name of. Is that it?
So, podcast, yeah.
Podcast.
Podcast, yeah.